My stepkids said I was an unwanted guest. So I walked out with the money, the insurance, and the car. They watched me leave, speechless. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. You're not my real dad. It was the first unguarded sentence Liam ever spoke to me without Hannah in the room. He must have been 9 or 10 back then, skinny arms crossed, standing in the kitchen doorway with the kind of defiance that belongs to boys who already know where the sharpest knife can cut. His voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. The weight of those 5 words was enough to slice me open and leave me bleeding without a sound. Emma didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just clung to her mother's arm and tilted her head away from me, as if my presence in their house was something sour in the air. That was my introduction. That was how I learned what my place would be. My name is Alex. I'm 43 now. I've been married to Hannah for 8 years. She has 2 children from her first marriage, Liam, who is 17, and Emma, who is 15. I never had children of my own. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe it left me too eager, too ready to pour everything into them, desperate to prove myself worthy of a title they never intended to give me. From the very first day, I made a private vow. I would not be the man who left. I would not be the man who abandoned them to silence and broken promises. I would be present, supportive, responsible, consistent. I thought that would be enough. When Hannah and I first started seeing each other, the kids treated me with a politeness so fragile it was almost cruel. Liam mumbled obligatory hellos without ever meeting my eyes, already buried in the protective armor of his headphones and video games. Emma stayed quiet, speaking only through Hannah, as though I didn't have the right to hear her voice directly. At birthdays, at school events, even in the living room of the house I eventually paid for, I was treated like a stranger who had wandered too far into private territory. I didn't push. I told myself they needed time. Children of divorce always do. So I waited, swallowing my discomfort, pretending that indifference wasn't rejection, that silence wasn't contempt. I learned the shape of their lives. I memorized their schedules, drove them to practices, sat through endless games and recitals. I fixed their bikes when the chains snapped. I stayed up late helping with math homework that made Hannah's head spin. I bought the clothes, the cleats, the braces, the little things that pile up into mountains when you're raising children. All the while, I told myself that patience would pay off. That if I just kept showing up, if I kept standing in the doorway of their lives without walking away, one day they would see me for what I was. Not a placeholder, not an intruder, but someone they could rely on. Someone who stayed when their father didn't. But there are truths you can't ignore forever. One of them is this: love and effort don't outweigh blood. Their father, Michael, was unreliable, a shadow that appeared only when it suited him. He was late on child support more often than not. Holidays came and went without him, or with hurried visits that left more tension than joy. He broke promises, canceled plans, forgot birthdays, and yet, he was still Dad. His absence didn't make him fade. It made him mythic. It gave him the kind of power I could never touch. He was the ghost they longed for, the man they defended even when defending him meant cutting me down. And me? I was just Alex. There were moments, small ones, when I thought the ice might crack. Emma once asked me to help with a school project about building a family tree. She handed me the paper with all its empty boxes and hesitated, almost whispering, "Where do you go?" For a second, my chest warmed. I thought she was giving me a place. But then she shook her head and erased the box, saying, "Never mind. Mom says Dad's name goes here." She meant Michael. Always Michael. Liam was harsher. By the time he was 12, he had perfected the art of dismissal. If I offered advice, he'd laugh under his breath and say, "That's not how Dad would do it." If I tried to share a story from my own childhood, he'd roll his eyes and remind me, "You don't get it. You're not Dad." Even when Michael disappointed him, missed a game, skipped a birthday call, Liam's anger always found its way to me instead. I was the one in the room, the one available to absorb the blows. And Hannah? She told me to be patient. She said, "They're just kids. They'll come around." She said, Don't take it personally. But she never corrected them. Never demanded they treat me with even the barest shred of respect. Her silence told me more than her words ever did. She wanted me to be useful, but she wasn't willing to fight for my place. So I kept giving. Year after year. I worked overtime to cover their braces, to replace Liam's cracked phone, to make sure Emma could go on every school trip. I was the chauffeur, the repairman, the banker, the tutor. I was everything except the one thing I wanted to be: family. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself respect doesn't arrive overnight. I told myself maybe when they were older, maybe when they understood sacrifice, maybe when Michael failed them one time too many, they would finally look at me and see the truth. That I had been the one who stayed. That I had been the one who kept them fed, clothed, and safe. But the years wore on, and the pattern never broke. Each holiday reminded me where I stood. I cooked the meals, decorated the tree, bought the presents, and watched them light up when Michael's name appeared on a gift tag, even though he hadn't wrapped the box or paid for the ribbon. I watched them open cards from him with 3-word messages: "Love you, Dad," and smile wider than they ever did at the countless hours I spent making their lives livable. Every rejection, every silence, every comparison carved itself into me, leaving scars no one could see but me. And yet I kept showing up, because I believed that one day, my presence would matter more than his absence. I was wrong. I know that now. I wanted to give us something that felt whole. Something that might finally stitch us together into more than just 4 people living under one roof. That's why I planned the trip. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't careless. It was deliberate. Months of overtime, weekends spent buried in reports, evenings falling asleep with my laptop still glowing on the nightstand. All of it fed into the savings I needed. I rented a big house on a lake in Minnesota. Not just a house, but a place that looked like it had been carved from a dream. Wide porches that opened to the water, a private dock with a boat waiting, kayaks stacked neatly, a fire pit for long nights under the stars. I booked it for a week. The cost was staggering. $6,000, not counting the gas, food, or the time off work I had to beg for during the busiest season of the year. But I told myself it was worth it. 1 week to show them what family could be. 1 week to give Liam a memory before his senior year swallowed him whole. 1 week to show Emma that not all fathers or stepfathers disappoint. I believed this trip would be our reset. A chance to breathe outside the walls where ghosts like Michael lingered too easily. A chance for laughter to replace silence. For togetherness to grow where indifference had taken root. I built the fantasy brick by brick, convincing myself that money and effort could buy me something more than cold politeness. Then Hannah came to me, 1 week before we were set to leave. We were in the kitchen. She had that nervous look about her. The one where her eyes don't stay still, where her hands fidget with the edge of her shirt. I knew before she opened her mouth that it was something I wouldn't want to hear. The kids, they were asking, she said softly, if it might be okay to invite their father, just for a couple of days. They miss him. I froze. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. My mind replayed her words, slow and deliberate. Invite their father. Michael. To the trip I had planned, paid for, and built in my head as the last fragile chance for us to bond. Invite him. My voice cracked, low, disbelieving. To my trip? To our trip? They just miss him, she said again, her voice careful, almost apologetic. It's not the same with you, Alex. You're their stepdad. They want their dad. That word just hit harder than any slap. Just their stepdad. I had bled for this family, bent my spine under their needs, given every ounce of myself, and in her mouth I was reduced to a placeholder, a shadow, an accessory to the real thing. Then who am I? I asked, not out of anger, but from the hollow, aching space inside me that needed her to say something different, to defend me, to prove I wasn't invisible. But Hannah didn't answer. She just looked at me with that tired expression, the one that said I was overreacting, the one that asked me to swallow it down like I always did. Later that evening, I tried to talk to Liam. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could reach him if I came to him as a man, not a stepfather. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, eyes glued to the glowing screen. He didn't look at me when I spoke. "I thought this trip was for us," I said carefully. "For our family. Don't you want that?" He finally raised his eyes, just enough to let me see the contempt burning there. His words were flat, rehearsed, sharp as a blade. "This is a family trip. You're just an unwanted guest. This isn't your place." Unwanted guest. I stood there in the doorway, every muscle in my body locked, every memory of the years I'd given flashing through my head, birthdays I'd paid for, games I'd cheered at, bills I'd covered without complaint. And in his mouth, all of it dissolved. I wasn't part of the family. I wasn't even necessary. I was unwanted. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg him to take it back. I just turned and walked out, because in that moment, words would have been wasted. He had spoken the truth he carried inside, the one no amount of patience or sacrifice could erase. That night, I lay awake in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. Hannah shifted beside me, but she didn't speak. She didn't try to repair what her son had broken. Her silence was complicity, as it always had been. And I realized this wasn't the first time I'd been erased. It had been happening for years. This was just the first time they'd said it out loud. So I made my choice. The next morning, while they were still sleeping, I sat at the computer and changed the reservation. I downgraded from the big house to a small cottage. No dock, no boat, no fire pit. Just a quiet place for one person. I moved the money out of our joint account. I shifted the car insurance, the bills, everything back into my own name. For years I had funded their lives unquestioningly, but if I was nothing more than a guest, then it was time to live like one, alone. I packed my bag. I left a note on the table, each word sharp and deliberate. "Since I'm just an unwanted guest, you can plan your family vacation with Michael." When I walked out the front door, Hannah and the kids were in the yard. They had followed me out, their faces pale with confusion. None of them spoke. Not Hannah, not Emma, not Liam. They just watched silently as I carried my bag to the car, started the engine, and pulled away. The gate closed behind me, and in the rearview mirror they stood there, small and still, watching the man they had reduced to nothing finally act like it. 2 days later, Hannah texted me. Her words were sharp, dripping with accusation. "You blindsided the kids. You ruined everything." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling with a rage I didn't let myself send back. Because in her message was the truth I had swallowed for 8 years. I had never been part of their everything. I was only ever a convenience, provider, a stand-in. And the first time I refused to play that part, I was the traitor. Liam never reached out. Not a word. Emma did. A week later, her message hesitant, almost childlike. "Did you really leave?" I typed back slowly, every letter heavy with the weight of years. I was never really invited. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. My decision wasn't loud, it was surgical, cold, exact. When Liam told me I was an unwanted guest, when Hannah said I was just their stepdad, something inside me shifted. Not snapped. Not exploded. Shifted. As though the foundation I had been standing on for 8 years finally gave way, revealing there had never been ground beneath me at all, only air. That's why I acted the way I did. Not with anger, but with clarity. The first thing I did was protect myself. I closed accounts. For years, our money had been one river flowing through all of us, feeding their needs, their wants, their whims. I was the current they never saw, only the water that filled their cups. That morning, I split it apart. Every account that had both my name and Hannah's, I drained it. I left her share, but mine came with me. The car insurance, the mortgage payments, the utilities, all of it shifted back into my name alone. If they wanted to call me a guest, then I would live like one. Guests don't pay the mortgage. Guests don't fund college funds. Guests don't bankroll family vacations that aren't theirs. I left the note on the table because silence would have been too kind. Words were necessary, if only to mark the line in ink. "Since I'm just an unwanted guest, you can plan your family vacation with Michael." I didn't add more. No pleading, no justification, no apology. Just the truth they had handed me, reflected back at them. When I pulled away from the house, they stood at the gate. Hannah, her arms crossed but her face uncertain. Emma, shrinking behind her mother, her eyes flickering between me and the gravel at her feet. Liam, expression flat, jaw tight, refusing to show anything at all. None of them moved. None of them called out. They let me go, and I let them. The first 48 hours were silence. I stayed in the cottage I'd booked for myself, staring out at the lake as though the water might hold some kind of answer. At night, the quiet pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. My phone stayed dark until the second evening. That's when Hannah's first message arrived. You blindsided the kids. You ruined everything. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of what had been said to me. No attempt to shoulder any part of it. In her words, I wasn't the man who had carried her children for nearly a decade. I was the saboteur, the traitor, the man who had destroyed their precious vacation by refusing to accept my place at the bottom of the hierarchy. I stared at her message until the screen dimmed. I thought of the years I had bent myself into the shape of what she needed. How I stood outside restaurants while she and the kids had family dinners with Michael. Because it was important for them to have time with their real dad. How holidays were reshuffled to make room for him, while I became an afterthought in my own home. How birthdays always carried his name, his presence, even if he hadn't earned it, while my gifts were opened politely, quietly, as though they were less real because they came from me. And through all of it I swallowed. I told myself love meant compromise. I told myself my role was to endure until they saw me for what I was. I told myself patience was proof of devotion. But the first time I set a boundary, the first time I said no, I was branded the destroyer. I didn't respond to Hannah. I didn't have to. Silence said everything. Liam never texted, never called. His words in that bedroom had been final. He had drawn his line with surgical precision. Unwanted guest. And he didn't walk it back. Not once. Emma was different. A week later, she reached out. Just one message. Did you really leave? I stared at it for a long time. My fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to soften, to reassure, to tell her I hadn't abandoned her. But the truth demanded more than comfort. The truth was simple. I typed it slowly, each word weighted. I was never really invited. She didn't respond. Not that day, not the next. And in her silence, I heard everything. 3 months passed like that. Hannah's texts came in bursts. Please one day, anger the next, bargaining the day after. We can fix this. You're overreacting. The kids didn't mean it. Please come to Emma's game. We can start over. Her words were desperate, but underneath them was the same refusal to name the truth. That she had stood by while her children erased me. That her silence had been as sharp as their cruelty. I didn't yield. Not this time. Emma surprised me. A month into the silence, a handwritten note arrived. No text. No email. A note in her careful, slanted handwriting. I'm sorry for what I said. You've done more for us than anyone. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume. I read it 3 times, tracing the letters with my fingers. For a moment, something in me cracked. For a moment, I almost believed redemption was possible. But then I remembered. I remembered the way she had looked away when Liam called me an unwanted guest. I remembered how she had erased me from her family tree project years ago, choosing Michael's name over mine without hesitation. I remembered every time she smiled wider at his presence than at my sacrifices. Her note was not respect. It was regret. Regret comes cheap. Respect costs everything. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it away. But I didn't answer either. Hannah begged me to attend Emma's next game. She said Emma wanted me there. I almost went. I pictured myself in the bleachers, the same way I had been for years, clapping, cheering, invisible until they needed me. But then I thought of Liam, of his words, unwanted guest, and I stayed home. Because that's what guests do. They leave when they're not welcome. And in those months of silence, I learned something I should have understood years earlier. Family isn't about blood. Everyone says that. But the darker truth is this. Family isn't about sacrifice either. You can bleed yourself dry for people and still be invisible. You can show up every day, every year, and still be disposable. Family is about loyalty. It's about reciprocity. It's about who claims you when it costs them something. Hannah hadn't claimed me. Liam never would. Emma tried, but only when she felt the absence of what I had provided. Not when it mattered most. So I built new boundaries. Hard ones. Cold ones. Necessary ones. I love them. I won't deny that. Love doesn't just vanish. But love without respect is a noose. Tightens year after year until you can't breathe. I had been choking for 8 years. I finally cut the rope. And the silence that followed, it wasn't empty. It was clean. 3 months had passed when Hannah finally admitted what she should have said the night Liam called me an unwanted guest. That she had failed me, failed us, failed the marriage we built on my back. She was the first to break the silence. She arrived at my door one evening in late autumn, her hair tied back, her face pale, carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed too many speeches in the car and discarded all of them before knocking. When I opened the door, she didn't step inside. She just stood there, her breath visible in the cold air, her hands trembling. "I've started therapy," she said quietly. "For me. For the kids. I want to fix this, Alex. I want to fix us." Her voice cracked on that last word. Us. I stared at her, remembering the countless nights when us had meant me waiting in the car while she, Liam, and Emma shared dinner with Michael. Us had meant me staying silent while her children disrespected me under her roof. Us had meant me paying for their survival while she excused every cruelty with, "They're just kids." But I didn't slam the door. I didn't spit my bitterness at her. I just nodded once and said, "It's too late for apologies if respect doesn't follow them." She came again the next week. This time, she carried a folded piece of paper in her hand. Emma had written another note. "I'm sorry, Alex. I know I hurt you. You've done more for us than anyone. I was wrong." The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, as though Emma knew the words might not land. I read it slowly, tracing each line, searching for the sincerity that had been missing from her face every time she looked past me in the house. I didn't reply to Emma, not with words, but I didn't throw her letter away either. I placed it in the same drawer as the first one, where it sat like a wound that hadn't healed but also hadn't led me. The truth is, I had changed. I wasn't the same man who swallowed his pride in silence, who convinced himself that love without respect was still worth carrying. I wasn't the man who stood on the sidelines, waiting to be acknowledged. I had built my life on sacrifice, and all it had earned me was contempt. Now I wanted something different. Boundaries. Hannah asked me to come to Emma's basketball game. "She wants you there," she said, her eyes searching mine for a crack. "She misses you." I almost went. I pictured the bleachers, the squeak of sneakers on the gym floor, the rush of the crowd when a *T fell through the hoop. I had been there so many times before, clapping until my palms stung, calling her name until my voice went raw. I had been the father in the crowd when Michael never showed. But then I remembered Liam. I remembered the way he looked at me when he called me an unwanted guest. I remembered the years of silence, the contempt, the way Hannah had let him define me without correction. And I realized going back would mean resuming the role of the invisible provider, cheering from the stands while being erased at the dinner table. So I stayed home. That's the cruelest truth I've had to learn. Sometimes love demands you walk away, not because you stop caring, but because caring becomes a knife they hold to your throat. Hannah's calls became more desperate. She told me she was sorry. She told me she'd do anything to make it right. She told me the kids needed me, that Emma had been crying at night, that Liam, though he never admitted it, was struggling without my presence. But those words, spoken too late, didn't change the reality I had lived for 8 years. I had been the scaffolding that held their lives together, and the moment I removed myself, the structure wobbled. Not because they loved me, not because they respected me, but because they had grown used to leaning on me while giving nothing back. And I refused to go back to being a crutch. It isn't that I stopped loving them. Love doesn't dissolve in silence or in cruelty. It lingers heavy and stubborn, in the chest. I still think of Emma's laughter when she was younger, the rare moments she let me braid her hair before school. I still remember Liam's excitement the day I taught him how to ride a bike, even if later he pretended it never happened. These memories aren't gone, but they are poisoned now, colored by the years of rejection, the sharp words, the silence Hannah allowed. I carry those memories like scars. They're proof of what I gave and what I lost. Now I live differently. My money is mine. My time is mine. My peace is mine. If they want me in their lives, it will no longer be on their terms. It will no longer be as the guest who funds everything but is welcomed nowhere. It will be on mine. 3 months have turned into a new way of living. I still hear from Hannah. Sometimes it's pleading. Sometimes it's small talk. Sometimes it's nothing but silence on the other end of the line, as though she just wants to hear me breathe. But I don't bend anymore. Not for her. Not for the kids. And Emma, her letters come once in a while. Apologies written in ink. Words that might one day grow into something real. I read them all. Keep them all. But I don't answer. Not yet. Because apologies without change are just noise. And I've lived in noise long enough. I've learned something in all of this, something that should be obvious but isn't. Family isn't about blood, and it isn't about sacrifice. Family is about loyalty, about showing up when it matters, about defending someone even when it costs you comfort. Hannah didn't do that. Liam never did that. Emma is trying, but trying is not enough. Not now. So here I am, standing at the edge of a life I thought was mine, realizing it never truly was. I was the provider, the placeholder, the guest who mistook his invitation for belonging. And now, finally, I understand. If someone calls you a guest in the home you built, then maybe you're better off leaving them to live in it without you. I don't know if Hannah and the kids will ever learn what respect costs. I don't know if they'll ever look back and see the man who carried them when their father didn't. Maybe Emma will. Maybe Liam never will. Maybe Hannah will spend the rest of her life regretting the silence that drove me out. But I do know this. I will never again beg for a place at a table I built. So I'll ask you, the ones listening, the ones who think they understand family. Was I wrong? Was I cruel to draw the line after 8 years of being nothing more than a guest? Or was this the only way to reclaim myself from a house that never saw me as its own? Would you have endured it longer? Or would you have walked away too?